I exposed modern slavery in the garment industry. People had come to me from the nearby city saying, our local representatives won't do anything about it, they're all in on it. So we'd got thousands of people being paid £2.50, £3.50 an hour when the minimum wage was £9.50. They were working in sweatshop conditions for the fast fashion industry.
We've got a great guest today, the Honourable or former Honourable Andrew Bridgen, former Member of Parliament who has been through the ringer over the years simply for speaking his voice, which, last time I checked, you're supposed to be allowed to do this in the UK and the United States for sure. And he's here to share his story of his journey of what the heck happened and how his life has been transformed. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate having you on our show.
It's a pleasure, David, and great to have a platform to speak from.
We've had other politicians on our show, and I always ask the same question, like, why are you drawn to politics? It's such a thankless profession. It's so... You can't please anybody, or at least half the people, or more, slightly more than half, and it's like...
Well, my evidence would show that's not true. How did I get into politics? I was a very successful businessman, former Young Executive of the Year UK when I was young in 2000. I was chairman part-time of the Institute of Directors for the East Midlands, which is the part of the UK where I live. And I was running a couple of businesses which I'd started with £1,000 and built up to 30 million turnover businesses employing 300 people.
I'm curious what it is. I'm a businessman as well. Just
my social circle of small and medium-sized business owners. We used to go to a pub on a Friday night with our partners, and around 2005, everybody's moaning. I'd given some money to the Conservative Party to try and get rid of the Labour Party out of government. And that had not worked. So the Labour Party had got back in again, and all of my circle of friends were moaning every Friday night when we were socialising, and it must have been a pint of Marston's pedigree beer too many, and eventually I snapped and I said, look, every Friday we go through this routine. You're all capable people. The local area's in decline, the country's in decline. How about if I put all the money up, you stand for the local council, all of you, I'll stand for MP, we take over, and then it's our problem, we'll get it sorted.
Layla, we talk on the show a lot about how your online reputation can be used against you, but what if you could take back control?
Guess what?
What?
Erase.com does exactly that.
Are you kidding me?
They're an online reputation management company that is fantastic. They allow you to take back the power and not let the digital world decide what is said about you.
You bring up a good point. Don't let your online past define your future. These folks, they should call the experts at Erase.com because they can help.
Like they helped us?
They sure did.
And because you listen to Erase, if you just type in the promo code ERASED10, you will receive 10% off these amazing services that help you take back your power.
That's a great deal. Reference promo code ERASE10. You can get a 10% discount off their services.
I like it.
Do it now.
Do it now.
And I think they must have had one pint of Marston's pedigree or something too many, or a glass of wine too many, because they all said yes. And so we set about a strategy to take over the local area, and all my friends joined the Conservative Party locally, which was a moribund association in a seat that the Socialists had held for a long time. The council had always been held by the Socialists since 1983. It was the most deprived, Northwest Leicestershire was the most deprived part of the poorest part of the county of Leicestershire. In 2007, we took it with the biggest swing against the Labour Party in the country in those local elections.
One of your buddies or you yourself?
I ran the campaign, but I didn't stand for a councillor. Okay. My then wife did, and she got in, and all my friends got in, and we took the Labour Party from control since 1983 down to only 5 councillors out of 38 in one night. So we had control of the council, and we set about changing things. I got the nomination to be the Conservative candidate at the next general election. We didn't know when that was going to be, and we nearly had a general election in 2008, but they bottled it, so we went on till 2010. I built a factory in northwest Leicestershire in 2001, invested £10 million, created 300 jobs. I'd had experience with the council and the planning department, and I was bringing all these jobs and this wealth creation, building, on a 7 acre site, factory. And you'd have thought I was bringing bubonic plague. There was some anti-business, so I remembered all of this. And so when we got in, there were going to be a lot of changes at the local authority, the local council, and it was so corrupt before we took over. I mean, I think one of the Labour councillors was known as Mr. 2%. He wanted 2% of the they wanted 2% of the build cost as a sweetener. I mean, it's just ludicrous. So the whole area had not developed for years. It was in economic stagnation, and it was like fallow ground. It didn't take much turning round, and I got in. I was very disappointed. I didn't get the biggest swing in the country against Labour in the 2010 general election. I got the second biggest swing. And it had been interesting because I had a run-in with David Cameron, who was the leader of the opposition at the time and was going to be Prime Minister after 2010. But he'd come to my area and in front of my future constituents had told me that I wasn't going to get any money from the party and that I wouldn't win.
Is Cameron a conservative?
Yeah, supposedly a conservative.
Okay.
Um,
So just by way of definition, we have our socialists, we have our conservatives. Is that the same definition, same
It is, but
ideology?
confusingly, when I came over to Washington, D.C. In 2015, obviously the right of centre parties are blue in the UK and the left of centre parties are red, and that causes a bit of confusion.
Okay.
Um, with
We
the way
have
you do it.
rhinos. We have rhinos. I guess
Yeah,
there's our kinos
yeah.
or
Well, we have conservatives who are actually liberals. I mean, that's what they
right,
are.
right.
Liberal Democrats, really in the middle. So Cameron who was leader of the opposition, was going to be prime minister if we'd won the election. Basically, told me I wasn't going to win. He told me that he'd been to northwest Leicestershire in 2005 in that election campaign with Michael Howard, the then leader of the Conservatives, who lost, and told me that my major conurbation, which is the town of Coleville, which is a gritty ex-mining town, he said it was a dump. So I told him politely that I was going to win. I didn't need his money. I'd got my own. And if he felt like that about Northwest Leicestershire, the best thing he could do was never come again. And he is a man of his word sometimes because he never came again. And that was fine. So I I won handsomely in 2010. I was never in the club, and even I'd been selected as the candidate for Northwest Leicestershire. I mean, not many people wanted to be the Conservative candidate for Northwest Leicestershire because it was a no-hope seat, and there was no money and no association. And I was actually selected by an open primary. There were so few Conservative members locally in the association, they decided to throw it open to the public and just put coupons in the local papers, and anyone could fill in and say which candidate they wanted. But fortunately, 66% of them chose me, so that was good. And
So
I went down. I
it
went down
was
to Parliament to represent the place that I was basically brought up in, and represent the people I went to school with, and where my
beautiful,
factory was, and where my home was, which
beautiful.
was pretty good.
So how did it
I
become
really
socialist though? We did it lean social? Like how did it become a socialist region? Before you took it over.
well, even the socialist voters in my area, they were actually socially conservative, if you know what I mean.
No, what is that? How
They
what
were
does it? What does that
they
look
were
like?
social. Well, they liked the traditional family. They were very patriotic. They like people who've been in the armed forces. They they traditional sort of English people, really.
But they like
So
entitlements.
entitlements, no, I don't think they did. One thing that upset David Cameron a lot about me as well is because I was a self-made man. I mean, I could drive around a working class constituency in my Aston Martin or my Range Rover, and nobody minded because they knew I'd worked for it and paid my taxes. Whereas he couldn't because they knew he hadn't worked for it, you see. And he didn't like that. He didn't like that at all. So I went down to Westminster and I'd hardly been down there, I think twice before I was elected. It's quite an experience and got sworn in. And it's been an awakening. I mean, it's just not what you think it is, and it's not what I thought it was. I remember in 2011 saying to Cameron and George Osborne, who was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, they're supposed to be this brilliant. And of course, we were in coalition with the Liberal Democrats for the first 5 years, 2010 to 2015. And
Is a Democrat the same as our Democrats?
um, we've got three main parties. Well, we've got four now, but there's normally three main parties. You've got your right wing Conservatives, supposedly centrist Liberal Democrats who actually lean to the left, and then you've got the far left Socialists in the Labour Party. That's the normal balance of things. That's how it was in those first elections, and yeah, I mean, I said to David Cameron and George Osborne, "You're supposed to be these brilliant politicians," and I said, we're making things change in Northwest Leicestershire, and we don't need politics. All we need is policies that make life better for the people we're representing, make them feel more secure, more job opportunities, and a better prospects for the next generation. I said, and everyone's happy, and then we get back in again, and we got back in with running the council again, so that was good through that electoral cycle, and they turned around to me and said, "You don't understand. It's all a game, Andrew." And I don't think I did understand in 2011. But I think by 2020, I understood exactly what was going on. And quite honestly, David, I didn't like it. So we went through various election cycles. I always increased my majority. I led, I'm a Brexiteer. I'd met a lot of Labour politicians through my role with the Institute of Directors as well. And I mean, they were never up to much, put that way. Um, I wasn't surprised that the country was in a mess. But what I realise now is we actually have a party system, and our party systems are completely corrupted in the UK. So I mean, this left and right business, it's not about left and right, it's about right and wrong. And it's an illusion of choice, quite honestly, over here now, as it is in most of Europe.
I'm getting like a little deja vu because we had Congressman Dave Brott on our show, who was also a rookie legislator, and he was very surprised by that things were not as they thought they were going to be when he arrived. So you're saying almost exactly the same things. How would you summarize the game that you learned about upon arrival? Is anybody?
Well, I mean, you're expected to be whipped all the time and told how to vote on everything. So, I mean, if you accept that, I mean, you might as well send a mannequin down. And what I realized is that the game of politics, it works by doing what your party wants, what's good for your political party. If you do that, you can go far, be a minister and whatever. But I mean, if you do what's good for your people, I mean, that's seen as of anathema. And I spoke out about something called the Post Office Horizon scandal. Not very long after I arrived in Parliament, one of my constituents came to me with a conspiracy theory about how he and his wife had been criminalised running the post office in a small village in northwest Leicestershire, that there was a faulty computer system which was generating huge losses. They got blamed for them. And by listening to him, and they were already convicted criminals, and I looked at them in that meeting and thought, why are you going through all this if it's not true? Because it was clearly very harrowing for them to even talk about it. And I didn't have any power to do much about it. They were convicted and they were having their home repossessed to pay the alleged debt that they owed to the post office. And they were people with a blemishless track record of honesty and suddenly being convicted of a massive fraud. And they sounded to me like they were telling the truth. So I did a bit of investigating, and ultimately, years later, working with a few other MPs, we uncovered something called the Horizon Post Office scandal. Horizon was the name of the software system they were forced to use, and it turned out that successive governments had covered it up. 1,000 people in the UK got falsely criminally prosecuted and forced, and thousands got forced to pay money back they didn't owe, and it ended up being a huge scandal. And I uncovered all of that, and I'd had all the evidence 10 years ago, went to all the mainstream media, and I'm sure it's the same on Capitol Hill. Every major news channel, newspaper in the UK has got their best representatives are in what we call the lobby. That's the lobby of journalists. And I knew lots of them. And I went around them all and I said, 10 years ago, here's all the evidence. These people are all innocent. Biggest miscarriage of justice in the UK's history so far. Run the story, you'll win an award. And every one of them refused to run the story. And then I thought, well, something's seriously wrong here. And then
this should be on our show. This is a story of cancellation with 1,000 victims.
Absolutely. And if you want to look at it, I produced my own version of what happened. It's called Storm on the Horizon. It's on YouTube. Andrew Bridgen, YouTube. Storm on the Horizon. You can watch that 30-minute mini documentary. It shows you my constituents and what they're saying, and I exposed the modern slavery in the garment industry in the city of Leicester, which isn't in my area, but people had come to me from the nearby city saying our local representatives won't do anything about it. They're all in on it, this conspiracy. So we'd got thousands of people being paid £2.50, £3.50 an hour when the minimum wage was £9.50. They were working in sweatshop conditions for the fast fashion industry. And it had a link. Say again?
Immigrants mostly?
Oh yes. Mm-hmm. They were being terribly exploited. And some of them were living, overcrowded housing. Because, your housing opportunities on £3.50 an hour. A lot of them, I think, have been trafficked into the UK, and they were never ever going to be able to pay the debt off for their traffickers. They were going to be slaves for the rest of their lives. It was appalling, and that's I exposed that. I exposed the government's high-speed rail project called HS2 as it's a land grab. There was never an intention to. Been running for 10 years. It's cost tens of billions of pounds. They've never actually laid any track yet, but they have bought a lot of property along the line, very cheap off people. And of course, we got round to the pandemic, and it just happened that my degree from Nottingham University, the degree I'd read in the 80s, just happened to be in biological sciences, with biochemistry, specializing in genetics, virology, and behavior. So
before we go deep on this topic, I really want this episode to be on YouTube, so we have to be really careful about what we say because they're very particular about how things are presented.
They're not quite as bad as they used to be.
We got a strike against us already in our brand new show.
Well, when I spoke out about the vaccines in the UK Parliament, YouTube actually took my speeches down, even though they were spoken in Parliament with the government's minister's response. They took 3 or 4 of my speeches down. When I complained about that on X, I think I had 4.2 million views, and they had to put them back up within a week. what I found out, the more I looked at what was going on in the pandemic, the less I liked it. In 2016, I led the East Midlands, so this whole region of the UK, uh, in the referendum campaign to leave the European Union, and it was tremendously successful. Um, it was. Um,
You are a Brexiteer,
I'm a I'm a Brexiteer. I'm also a Spartan. I voted 3 times against Theresa May's vassalage deal to sell us out to the EU. I was one of the Spartans that wouldn't give in, and yeah, I mean, we overwhelmingly voted to leave. 61% in my area voted to leave the European Union. It was 59 across the whole of the East Midlands, so it wasn't close up here. We are very Eurosceptic. Um, and then, of course, the whole world went crazy after that. Our Parliament, there was no plan for us to vote to leave. That wasn't supposed to happen. It's a bit like Trump getting elected in 2016. That wasn't supposed to happen either.
I remember.
Um,
I remember when
and,
I was observing from abroad what was happening. It
and
was a big surprise that it actually the people wanted to exit the EU.
and by the time we got around to 2019, that was my fourth term. And in that seat that David Cameron said would never win, there were 6 candidates for that election in December 2019, the snap election. I got 63% of all the votes. And by
And the second
2019,
place, what was second?
second place were the Socialists still, but they had about 24% of the votes.
Overwhelmingly crushing.
Oh, 63% of all the votes,
Yeah.
which is pretty close to the 61% when I got when, because all the political parties, they were all for Remain. It was an independent Leave campaign. So the Conservatives, Labour, and the Lib Dems, they were for Remain. It was only sort of mavericks that were for Leave, and the people went with Leave. They didn't go with the establishment, you see. So 61%, then up 63% in the 19 election.
But the second
And
place was in the 20%.
yeah, yeah,
Crazy.
my majority was a lot bigger than any votes that anybody else got.
Yeah. Right?
Um,
Exactly.
so and what we'd actually done locally in those years from 2007 to 2019, so 12 years, we'd moved northwest Leicestershire from the poorest area in Leicestershire, where there are 7 constituencies and 3 in the city, so 10. We'd moved it to the richest in 12 years through the local government.
You
Yeah.
should have had hats to make Leicestershire great again.
We'd made northwest Leicestershire great. We got the highest economic growth in the country. We'd created loads of new jobs. So 1.2 jobs for every person of working age in the constituency. So a lot of people have to travel into our area to work. That keeps the wages up. And we were then the only part of Leicestershire um, where we'd got above UK average household income. And because we'd built enough good quality housing in the area, we kept our house prices at 30% below UK average. So you've got above average UK incomes, 30% lower housing costs. Well, I found out, I discovered very early on speaking to the people that what they wanted to be happy was they wanted to be able to get a good, well-paid job locally, be able to buy a house locally, pay the bills, pay the mortgage, go out on a Friday night and have, 2 weeks holiday a year flying out from the airport in my area. I mean, they weren't asking for much and we delivered it. And so I wasn't surprised that by 2019, Northwest Leicestershire was the happiest place to live in the Midlands. So, I mean, that wasn't surprising. And contented people vote for the status quo, don't they? So 63%, we'll have some more of that. So that was my 4th term. Um, um, and then, of course, 6 weeks after that, the whole world went crazy, and we went into this COVID pandemic business.
So
And
2019, you're a regional hero in a very large way. People love you, even though you were uncovering all kinds of scandals and it wasn't seeing the light of day. Still, you were being super effective, great leadership skills. Probably if that were you applied in your business career, you applied here, and everything was working great. So then we enter March of 2020, basically. Okay, so and by this point, you've learned there's a game here, right? You've learned there's a game. You don't like it, but you've served 4 terms, and you're very, very popular, and people want to see you continue in your leadership. Am I
Yeah,
characterizing it well?
yeah. And then the world went crazy. So we've got the highest economic growth in the country, and during the lockdowns, and the happiest place to live in the Midlands. So in a big chunk, the happiest place to live during the lockdowns, the suicide rate in my area was higher in a month than we'd normally have in a year. You got a lot of self-employed people who weren't getting any support from the government. They were they were losing their businesses. Small businesses were locked down. Big businesses, international businesses, were still functioning. They were taking all the markets. So Amazon was still open, but all the mom and pop shops shut down,
There was
non-essential.
no PPP money like we had in the States.
Yeah, there was, but a lot of self-employed people didn't qualify. If you'd just gone self-employed, you're going to be struggling to get any money at all. You had to have, records that you've made a profit for so many years. Yeah.
Self-employed, like a restaurant owner.
No, sort of a man with a van, or a painter and decorator, or a, a self-employed labourer, a thing like that. A bricklayer, those sorts of things. And they were, lots of people fell through, or a farm contractor even. They fell through that. They fell between the stools, and I saw the way it hit my area, and we got the highest economic growth in the country. So, I mean, it must have been devastating. And the more I looked at the science, um, it just didn't, nothing added up. And when I saw respected scientists and some doctors, medical doctors, speaking out and raising legitimate concerns about the pandemic response, whether that was the masking or the social distancing um, or the jabs, and what the response was, that you know they were just cancelled, and that only raised my concerns, because that's not the way science works. And anyone who ever tells you that the science is settled, I mean, that just isn't the way that science works. Science is always there to be challenged, improved, thesis, counter thesis. I mean, I know that doctors who finish in the UK at medical school after 5 years, the last thing they're told is that half of what we've taught you will be proven wrong within 10 years. So you're going to have to keep an open mind and be retrained. Well, that isn't settled science, is it ever? So my concerns were raised, and when we got round to 21, um, I got the impression that we've been locked down for Christmas 2020. I got the impression that we were going to get locked down again, and I knew the effect it was having on my people and my area. I was monitoring what was going on in South Africa with the Omicron variant, and I was speaking to some South African scientists and doctors, and it was clear that the COVID virus had attenuated, which is normal for a virus to become less lethal and more transmissible. I think the original Wuhan strain of COVID-19 had a transmission rate, an R rate, they call it, an R rate of 3, i.e., everyone who caught the original strain on average gave it to 3 people. And we knew that lockdowns couldn't stop the spread. Well, the Omicron variant, the South Africans told me it had got an R rate of 12, but it was far less lethal than the original strain, which is normal. What happens? A third of all common colds are coronaviruses, and they're just a snivel, aren't they? They've attenuated to they're highly contagious, but not very harmful. And that's what I believe was going on. I raised this with the government, but it was pretty clear they wanted another lockdown for the Christmas, and that would have been devastating. We came out of the first lot of lockdowns with 1 million under 25s in the UK on a waiting list for mental health support. That's what it did to mental health in the UK. I mean, and especially small children, a couple of years of lockdown is a huge proportion of their life. If you're four, it's a big chunk of your life. If you're 50 or 60, it's not such a big chunk of your life. So the effect was overwhelmingly, and the schools were shut. It had thrown everything out, and a lot of the people in London were living pretty good lives. I mean, even the media people I was speaking to, they like working from home. They got a big house with a garden. If you were living in overcrowded accommodation with no garden in a flat, with three or four children and only one computer to try and do some schoolwork on, that was not a good time for anybody.
You may
And
not
I
know
think,
this. My wife and I have a school. One of the things that we have is a school, Setner Academy, and my wife, God bless her, has a great bullshit detector. Sounds like you do as well. And so we knew very, very early on this is not right. And so we took a stance against all of the policies with the social distancing and the mask requirements and certainly the vaccinations. And there was a leak to the media, and we had global media outcry. Literally, the media was camping out outside of our school for a
if
week.
that's why you were cancelled.
Counseled? What do you mean by counseled?
Now, cancelled. Was that why you were cancelled?
Oh, canceled. Yes, yes. That was our first round of cancellation. We've had another one that's related, and we've had three cancellation attempts, as I like to say.
You've got a medal with two bars on it.
Pretty much.
Clips.
And thicker skin, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, in December 21, so I got the impression, I got this feeling that the government was setting to they were ramping up this Omicron's highly transmissible, and we'll have to have more. This is what the rhetoric they were using. So I got the impression they were going to try and lock us down again. And mysteriously, we're in Parliament in December 21. Boris Johnson's the Prime Minister, and I got an invite to go to a party at Number 10. And I wrote back to Number 10 and said, look, it's fine. Thank you for the invite for the party, but I've got the impression that you're going to try and lock
Just for our audience,
lock
was it 10 Downing Street?
and Downing Street.
Yeah,
Yes, that's
yeah.
the Prime Minister's flat is and the offices.
Yes.
Number 11 is the Chancellor of the Exchequer. The whole of Downing Street, number 9, 10, and 11, they're actually one building. Most of its offices, there are two flats in there, one for the Chancellor and one for the Prime Minister, and some quite nice gardens at the back onto Horse Guards Parade. And I said, oh, yeah, it's nice to be invited to a party. And obviously, they were inviting lots of MPs to these social events. I said, but given that I got an impression you're probably going to try and take away the freedoms of my constituents again this Christmas, if it's that serious, we shouldn't be having any social events, risking spreading this dangerous virus. And I pointed out that if Omicron's got the original strain had an R rate of 3, this has got Omicron's probably got 12. You couldn't stop the spread of 3. I mean, what sort of lockdown measures would you need to restrict a virus that was 4 times more transmissible than the one you couldn't lock down before? So, I mean, it's just unbearable and it's completely ineffective and unnecessary. So I said no. And then the week after, I got another invite. The second week in December, I got another invite to a party at Downing Street. And by this time, the government had announced they were looking at lockdown measures again. And I said, no, it's absolutely inappropriate. I didn't come last week. I'm not coming this week. I'm more than happy to have a business meeting, policy meeting with the Prime Minister, but I'm not coming for a social event. You're going to take away the liberties of my constituents. I'm going to speak against it. I'm going to vote against it. So I'm not coming for a social event. And then the week after that, something called the Partygate scandal broke, which turned out that those hundreds of civil servants and advisors who work in Downing Street, they hadn't been social distancing or masking all the way through the pandemic. In fact, they'd been having drinking parties and they'd been socializing, going out with a trolley bag to the local off license, bringing back alcohol so people couldn't see it, and then having parties. And these people had got access to all the latest scientific information, and obviously, they weren't worried about killing Granny or transmitting this virus. And and I got to a civil servant who, and they're not all bad. And he was working in number 10, and he'd actually written an email during the lockdowns to his supervisor saying, don't you think, since we've inflicted all these measures on the country, that we ought to be socially distancing and masking while we're in the building? And his boss wrote back to him saying, well, we've checked it out with the scientists and none of it actually works. And I had the scientific background, and because I understood the papers, I was speaking with doctors and scientists who'd been cancelled because they were doing this research and trying to publish these papers in the UK and publicise the fact that there were questions about the safety and efficacy of the vaccines. And I'm not politically naive. I knew the establishment would have a big kickback at me for speaking out. So I went around Parliament to colleagues I'd known for 12 years to get them to support me to stop the vaccine being put into authorised for infants unnecessarily, and it would have killed thousands of them, tens of thousands.
How,
And
how
then
much
and say again.
how much of this is America's fault? The tentacles of the CDC and the FDA and the
Well,
big
well, when I
pharma.
went in 2022, when I went to see Ron Johnson, we knew then that DARPA and the American DoD had created both the virus and the vaccines, and that they were both bioweapons. And we agreed that neither of us would call them bioweapons for 6 months because the public just couldn't cope with them. That's what we agreed, and we knew that.
So not China. This is not a escape from a Wuhan laboratory.
It was sent. It was sent. It was created in Chapel Hill.
I've
In
heard this too. Yeah, I've heard this
created in
theory
Chapel
as
Hill. It
well.
was shipped out to Wuhan via Winnipeg, and that was where it was finished. It was slightly modified at the end and released. Yeah, yeah.
I've heard this.
And we knew that years ago.
But I mean, in
But the
terms of
public weren't
developing,
ready for it, and my parliament would never be ready for it.
in terms of policies of mandatory vaccinations and all that, how much of that extends all the way back to the CDC and the decisions that they make and the FDA and so on? Is like kind of like the
Well, the
world
whole world
follows
was
suit.
the whole other developed world was in lockstep. I mean, our government, doesn't matter who's in power. I mean, over decades, they'd created a pandemic response policy on the risk register. And just like every other government in the world, that policy was looked at, thrown in the bin, and everybody went with the World Health Organization's mandates, masking, social distancing, lockdowns, and and mRNA gene therapies. The whole world went crazy at the same time. So many times the world's in lockstep, going in the wrong direction. It just leads you to think there must be a guiding hand behind all of this. So, so in November 2022, when I find out what our regulators are up to, trying to authorize these jabs for infants, I went round colleagues and I was shocked. Some of them agreed with me. When I went through the science with them, some of them agreed with me that these vaccines were harmful. One of them told me that he'd had 2 Pfizer jabs, gone to the gym, had terrible chest pains, gone to hospital, had an ECG, and they told him he's had 2 heart attacks. And if he wasn't as fit as he was, he'd be dead. And I thought, well, you're bound to help me. And he said, no, I'm not speaking about it. Another one came to me and said that her sister had taken a Moderna booster and was now paralysed from the neck down. And I said, I'm really sorry about that, but obviously you're going to speak out now. You've got to speak out. You know it's the truth. She said, you're right about the vaccines. And I said, well, then you'll speak out. You've got to. You've got to speak out. You've got a duty, you know. And she said, well, it's my sister, and she's a nurse, and they coerced her into taking the booster, And now she's at the mercy of the NHS because she's paralysed from the neck down. And she said, and you know what the health service in the UK is like with whistleblowers. I can't speak out. And so she never spoke out. I had the wives of MPs coming to see me who told me that their husbands, she told them not to have any more, and they'd had the booster, and now he's got a heart condition. So there were lots of MPs who were harmed, lots of MPs who were harmed, uh, but nobody would speak. So that just made me more determined. So I stood up on my own on the 13th of December, and my life changed. I stood up in the chamber. I'd got a debate on the safety and efficacy of the vaccines, told the government they should not be authorising them for small children, and we should suspend them and have an investigation. Um, and my life changed. From that moment, I was cancelled from the mainstream media. I was normally on television 3 or 4 times a week, quoted in the newspapers. That all stopped. I had one last interview with the BBC, and they said to me, "Why are you willing to sacrifice your political career on the hill of vaccine harms?" And I said, "Well, what career? And what does that matter? We're talking about people's lives here." And eventually I said, "Well, why am I willing to sacrifice my career on the hill of vaccine harms? Because that's the hill they're killing my people on."
So you lost your marriage broke up. Did you lose any friends and family as well along the
Oh
way?
yes, from the moment I spoke out about the vaccines, I was basically ostracised. Um, so for the last 20 months I was an MP, I had to eat all my meals on my own in the House of Commons. So any other workplace, it would be seen as bullying and intimidation, wouldn't it? And when I went to stand up in the chamber to speak, they just heckled me, catcalled me. And eventually when I got my debates, and it took ages to get the debates on excess deaths and everything like that, then they all just walked out of the chamber. But the public gallery was always full. And you can play a clip where the public are cheering, and there's nobody in the chamber except for me and the people who have to be there, like the speaker and the responding minister and a Labour front bencher. The whole chamber is empty. The public gallery is full, and even through the bulletproof glass, for the first time in history, you can hear the public roar when I tell them that they've got to stop, they've got to suspend the use of all the mRNA technology in humans and animals. That's never been heard of before in the UK Parliament. And they didn't like it. They threatened to throw the public out and close the public gallery down if they didn't stop clapping.
That's surreal.
It was surreal. And it took, and they threw me out of the Conservative Party for speaking out on the vaccines. Mm. So that isolated me further.
Everybody
Um,
turned against you.
yeah, even my staff in Parliament who'd been with me for years turned against me. Well, half of them did. It was a big test. So I got 4 members of staff, one in Parliament, three in the constituency, 2 men and 2 women. The 2 men were full time, and of course, when I was out of the Conservative Party, they were all members of the Conservative Party. And I said, "Look, this is, you've got to either come with me or stay with the Conservative Party. They are now the enemy, and I'm going to be attacking them, and I can't have you having split loyalty. So just make your mind up, either stay with me or leave." And the 2 men left. And I said, "Look, you're the two full-time guys. You've seen all this evidence come in about the vaccine. You know it. You know everything I've said is the truth. Why are you leaving me?" And they said, "We've also seen the way the party has, uh, what they've done to your reputation and your finances, and we don't want it done to us." So I said, and one of them had been with me for 17 years. And I said, "But you've got a wife and children now." I said, "So what you're saying to me is, you don't mind me going over the top to protect your wife and children, but you're not going to do it. You're not going to come with me." And because there was no answer to that, and then I never spoke to them ever again. The 2 ladies who worked for me were part time. I made them up to full time. They stayed with me, and I really admire their courage of staying with me.
Did anybody come back to you? I mean, we've learned a lot since that
Well,
time.
well, it's interesting. When I was thrown out of the Conservative Party, and we have sayings in our Parliament, you know, if you want a friend in politics, get yourself a dog. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I thought I had friends. None of them were willing to stand with me. Um, and when I was thrown out of the Conservative Party, um, not one of my colleagues who I'd worked with for 12 years and thought were my friends, nobody contacted me. But I did get a phone call on my mobile, unsolicited, from a US presidential candidate called Robert Kennedy Jr. at the time, and he said it was disgraceful what had been done, and he said, I'll help you where I can," and
We're good
he
friends with
has.
Bobby, by the way. My wife and I
Good
were
God.
board members of Children's Health Defense, and we were very, very close with
I've
Bobby.
spoken a lot of events all over Europe for CHD.
Hmm.
What was interesting as well is like my final warning was with the grandee of the Conservative Party before I was expelled. And I gave him an hour and a half of my time in his office. I explained everything
What's a
about the fact.
grandee?
Um, Somebody who'd be seen as a very, very senior member of the party, a very well established MP with a good reputation. And I thought he was a friend. I'd spoken in his area, he'd spoken in my area, I'd met his wife, met his children, and I thought, he's the sort of guy will understand and he's got the courage to. Anyway, I gave him an hour and a half. I already knew as well that his sister had to go into hospital after the second Pfizer. He didn't know I knew all this. I knew his constituents had been to him and explained everything, their concerns about the vaccines. I talked about the vaccines. I talked about the way that I believe that vulnerable elderly in hospital have been euthanized with midazolam and morphine. It would have been remdesivir in the US and other places, um, to create the first wave, and the science behind that. I mean, I don't know if you know that. I mean, the average between diagnosis with COVID-19 and death, the average time was 18.3 days in the UK. A viral infection burns out after 7 days. None of those people died of COVID. They died of bacterial pneumonia because they weren't treated with antibiotics.
Sure.
Well, they were either put on a ventilator if they were considered healthy enough, in which case 85% died because they over-ventilated them and blew their lungs out, which then they get bacterial pneumonia, or if they were considered to have COVID and they weren't well enough to go on a ventilator, they were given end-of-life drugs. Ran, Midazolam and morphine, which are respiratory suppressants. And why would you ever give someone you thought had a respiratory illness a respiratory suppressant? But of course, they didn't really necessarily have COVID, but they would have died with COVID-like symptoms from the midazolam and morphine, and huge amounts of that were used. And lots of studies have come out now that there was no correlation between the deaths in the first wave and COVID, but there was a massive correlation between the prescription of midazolam and morphine, surprisingly, which had killed them. And I went through all this with the grandee in his office, and he listened for an hour and a half. And at the end, I said, "Well, will you help me to stop this madness?" And he just turned around to me, and these are his words, and they stuck in my mind. He said, "Andrew, this is in January 2023. He said, "Andrew, there is currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines. There may well be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right then. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind that you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world, with all the personal risk for you, which that will entail should you pursue it." And at that point, I just said, "Well, I guess this meeting's over and I'm out of here." And I just walked out, and that was it. I was out of the party, done, and standing as an independent in the chamber and politically. And we got a lot of excess deaths post-pandemic. 2023, we're getting 2,500, 1,500 one week, 2,500, nearly 3,000 excess deaths. Well, after a pandemic, you should have a period of less than excess deaths, because obviously, if your vulnerable elderly have passed early in a pandemic, and they might have lived 6 months or 12 months longer, 6 months and 12 months on from the pandemic, you should have less people dying than you expected because they've already gone, sadly. And we weren't having that. after the vaccine rollout, we just had more and more excess deaths. And I tried to get a debate in our parliament about excess deaths and why this is happening. And we're getting the figures, and they're all terrible. And when we were going to have this less than excess deaths, it wasn't coming. And
So you're
I
still a
put,
member of parliament. You're just kicked out of your political
yes,
affiliation.
I'm still standing until the next election. And so I'm still putting my questions in. And in the UK Parliament, you can put in for a debate on any sitting week. And I put in every week for a debate on excess deaths, which is like something that's happening across the whole country. It's affecting the whole country. Nobody wants to talk about it except for me. And I keep raising it and asking the speaker for a debate. And every week it comes back on the computer, unsuccessful in ballot. I had 26 attempts to get a debate, 26 weeks. And you can't put in during recess weeks when Parliament's not sitting. So that was 9 months of every week asking for a debate on excess deaths, and I wasn't getting it. And that summer of 23, I started doing some research and thought Big Pharma must have done this before. And we had something called the thalidomide scandal yeah,
Hmm.
which you were spared most of that in America, but Europe, South America, Australasia, and I did a lot of research on this, and it was shocking. So what I found out is, and that's another little YouTube video that your viewers could watch. It's on Andrew Bridgen YouTube on my channel, and it's called Thalidomide: The Real Story. It's only a 20 odd minute little documentary. Now, what I found out was that thalidomide was created by a drug company in Germany called Chemi. They were formed at the end of the Second World War, and they recruited their scientists from the Nazi scientists. And their head scientist was a guy called Heinrich Mulker, who'd been indicted for war crimes in Poland and never convicted. He created thalidomide. It was basically an anti-nausea drug, um, which was then prescribed to pregnant women for morning sickness. That that when it was before it was marketed, it was given to Grunethal gave it out for free to their staff, and one of their workers' wives gave birth to a baby without any ears, but they didn't say anything. They pushed it out onto the market, and what we found out later was that it crossed the blood placenta barrier to the unborn fetus, and it appears that thalidomide prevented something called angiogenesis, which is the formation of blood vessels. And the marketing ploy of Grunethal with thalidomide was that you couldn't overdose on it, so you could take as much as you wanted. Um, and obviously, the amount of thalidomide that was taken by the pregnant woman, um, and the late stage of gestation of the baby at the time, that was the level of injury. 40% of all the babies died anyway, and 60% were born with horrendous life-changing deformities, mostly very short arms and legs, because obviously they couldn't form blood vessels to form those limbs. Um, the drug was removed from the market in 1961. What I found out from is that it was 1972 before the word thalidomide was allowed to be mentioned in the House of Commons in a debate.
Oh
11
no.
years. And also that Grunethal had an injunction against the Times newspaper to stop them running stories about the harms that this drug had done. And that was overturned in the European Court in Strasbourg, and three judges in the judgment said that debate on thalidomide had been suppressed for 11 years in the House of Commons. And I saw this judgment, and it was from the 1970s. And I made this documentary. And at the end of that summer recess in 2023, I sent it to the Speaker of the House of Commons, who'd been refusing my debates on excess deaths for 9 months. And his name's Lindsay Hoyle. And I sent it to him with a note and a message saying, we don't want history to repeat itself. What you can see here is that was suppressed for 11 years before there was a debate. So there was no compensation set up. And Grunethal got out of it by initially by setting up only a £3 million compensation fund for all the victims. And there were tens of thousands of victims, and more than that of people who'd lost their baby altogether. I think there's 3,000 left in the UK now who would be approaching retirement now. And Grunethal had made more money out of thalidomide than they ever gave in compensation for a drug that really had harmed everybody around the world. You had a lucky escape in America from that. It was absolutely appalling.
I see
And
I s-
mysteriously, three weeks after I sent that documentary to the speaker with the note saying we don't want history to repeat itself because the speakers were badly marked out in that judge's judgment. He found me a debate on, I think it was the 26th of October, 23rd of October. And that was, I think that was the first debate on excess deaths, which were happening everywhere in the world where the vaccines have been rolled out in any quantity. I think that was the first debate in any parliament. And that was, again, that was another one where everybody walked out on me. But the public gallery was rammed. And there were so many people turn up to Parliament to listen to that speech live. There were hundreds of people who couldn't get into the public gallery, and I had to go out into Parliament Square and give the speech again to the people who hadn't been able to hear it live.
I see a
Um,
little pattern with the thalidomide and the 6 month vaccination recommendation with the children. Clearly, children have a
by the
soft.
way, there are more than you think. So Grunethal got out of prosecution, that they were given immunity from prosecution for setting up a £3 million compensation fund. And also, guess what the marketing slogan of thalidomide was?
It's safe and effective.
It was safe and
Yeah,
effective.
yeah.
And after thalidomide, um, no big pharma company is allowed to make the claim safe and effective without caveats. But if you think back, it wasn't big pharma that said it was safe and effective. It was the politicians and the medical experts. They were the marketing arm for big pharma, making claims which it would have been illegal for big pharma to make because that was all sorted out with thalidomide.
So I see a pattern with the thalidomide and the 6 month vaccination recommendation with children. So clearly, children have a soft spot in your heart, and you have a huge heart. What happened as a child that has created the man that we see today that cares so much for young people? Are you able to share?
Well, that's deeply personal, but I didn't have a happy childhood, so yeah, I don't like anybody being cruel to children. It really gets to me, and yeah, ultimately, looking back now, it did cost me my political career. But I'll tell you one thing: the government in the UK never dared extend that vaccine down to those infants. Not after that speech, and they said it was all rubbish. They didn't believe any of it, but it's all on the record, and they couldn't. And I gave lots of speeches and updated the house, asked lots of questions, which you know they hated me going into the chamber. I used to get cat calls from other MPs. I said I was completely ostracised by my colleagues, who I thought were some of them my friends. Um, but what got me through was there are about 4,000 real people who work in our parliament in the UK. They're the cooks and the cleaners and the security guards and the clerks, and they were so nice to me. And the number of nights I'd walk out of Parliament and there'd be a cleaner mopping the corridor with her trolley, often a big black lady who I've never met before, and she'd look up and down the corridor, see there's no one about, and she'd pounce on me, put her arms around me, and say, "We're all praying for you. Keep going." It was unbelievable. The staff could only do it when there was no one else about because they would have got sacked for that, for showing political bias. But when we were on our own, they were so grateful for someone standing up and telling the truth.
So you ran again at one point as an independent, as I understand it, and you didn't do particularly well. Why? What happened? If people are cheering from you from the bleachers, why did you not? Why was that not reflected in the voting?
I'm afraid to say that the ballot in Northwest Leicestershire in July 2024 was rigged, and that's not just sour grapes. I got 63% of all the votes in 2019. My vote had gone up every single election. I'd led the Leave campaign, I say, for the referendum, where all the major parties were for Remain, and that people voted with me to leave, and we left. Um, I started smelling a rat about a year in after I'm an independent, and I told them I'm standing again as an independent. They put a lot of pressure on me not to stand. I was offered a financial incentive not to stand, and I said no, I'm standing. And a year out from the election, as it turned out, the whole of the local Northwest Leicestershire District Council's elections department, they all resigned on a Friday and were replaced by a whole new team. That just doesn't happen in local government. Everybody's gone. The whole team gone. Yeah.
Resigned.
Yes, resigned. And I thought, I didn't even hear about the planned resignation as the MP. I had just heard that they'd all been replaced on a Friday, and I rang the chief exec, and she was new as well. Who she would be the returning officer at the general election eventually. And I said, Alison, I rang her up and said, Alison, what's going on? I've just heard the whole of the elections department's gone. And she said, cryptically, she said to me, Andrew, it was the right time for them to move on. It's the right time for them. I said, well, I don't think it's going to be the right time for me for them to all move on. And during the election, I had more volunteers and put more leaflets out, and my recognition on the doorstep would be 95% by name on site.
On site, no less.
Absolutely. They knew, they either call me Andrew or Mr. Bridgen. If they call me Mr. Bridgen, I have to ask them whether they're going to vote for me or not. And I'd been the MP for 14 years, 4 terms. We transformed the area, and okay, I wasn't in the Conservative Party anymore, but I was still confident I could win. I wasn't going to get 63%. I thought I was going to win it with about 35%. It was a four horse race. It was going to be a very split vote, but I'd be all right. And I went to the count. It was at our new £26 million sports and leisure centre, because that's what we'd invested for the people. So it was a new place but it was right on the bypass. We'd had boundary changes. My seat had got a little bit smaller because of all the economic growth and the housing growth. My seat was too big. I got too many voters, so I had to give some up. So my seat had got a bit. We'd gone down from about 120 square miles to about 100 square miles.
Okay.
But I hadn't gained anywhere that wasn't already voted. I mean, most of my people there had already voted, including the referendums. They voted 7 times for me. Most of my people had voted 7 times for me. They knew me. And at the count, when we arrived, it's got this massive new car park outside the front of it. In the gymnasium for that sports and leisure centre, that's where the count would happen. I got into the car park, and there's barely enough. They got a big chunk of it. A third of it was coned off with security guards, which is unusual. And I said, what's going on here? There's barely enough parking spaces for everyone who's going to be at the count. And the security guard, obviously, he recognised me as everyone. He said, Mr. Bridgen, that's where the ballot boxes are coming in. We don't want anybody near the ballot boxes. I said, we don't normally do that. They're not all going to come at once. They're 3 parking spaces. It's no matter of pulling up, get the ballot box out, bring it into the hall to be opened. Something was completely different. And then I got in, and the polls close at. Well, it's interesting. I'd voted that morning for myself, believe it or not, at 7:30 in the morning. And in the queue behind me, there were 5 people at 7:30. And by the time I got to my car in the car park, having voted, 2 of the people in the queue behind me had already come to me and said, just voted for you. So in that queue of 6 of us, I knew I'd got at least half the votes.
Right.
I was quite cheerful.
Counting yourself, yes.
Counting myself, I got at least half the votes. And so at 10 o'clock, the new returning officer, the chief exec of the council, where the year before, the whole election team she stands up, and she's shaking. She's just shaking, physically shaking. and her voice is cracking. And she said, I have to make an announcement. And I thought, this is unusual. The polls have just closed, she said, but it's going to take a long time to bring the ballot boxes in. We might not get onto the count until 2 in the morning. That's 4 hours after the ballots have closed. Well, when we were 120 square miles for 5 elections and 2 referendums, we got the ballot boxes all in 30 minutes. Why is it going to take 4 hours? I never saw any of the ballot boxes opened. My votes were 3.2%.
I know. I saw that. Yeah.
Down from 63%. Now, everywhere I walk around my area, even now, everyone says they voted for me. Half the people say they voted for me. It was interesting. I also found out I'd agreed with the council a long time ago that the council buildings needed pulling down. They were quite old and very inefficient. A listed building at the front, which would be the registry office for the area, we'd pull down the old buildings. The customer facing services would go into empty shops in the shopping centre, and the backroom services of the council would go into offices that the council own on an industrial estate. What I didn't know is that all happened before the election, but they left the new elections department working in these massive offices completely unsupervised for the month before the general election. Also, 2 days after the election, and I'm in shock. I'm in shock that I've got 3.2%. A guy I'd been speaking to since the madness started in 2019, a constituent, he rang me up and he said that he was very disappointed. Him and his wife had voted for me, and he said, I need to tell you something though. He said, in the UK, a company called Ipsos Mori, a polling company, they do the exit poll. So as soon as the polls close, they've been speaking to enough people all around the country that they know what the result's going to be. Because he said, look, he said, I need to tell you, I work for Ipsos Mori, and I was in charge of the exit poll in your constituency, and we got it all sorted. We recruited everybody for it. We knew where we were going to go. Everything sorted. He said, and Ipsos Mori themselves, they were struggling to have enough people to man all the areas they needed to. He said, but we were all sorted in northwest Leicestershire. He said, inexplicably, his boss rang him 2 weeks before the election and said, you can stand down. We do not wish to poll northwest Leicestershire. And I put it to you, they didn't want to poll northwest Leicestershire because it wouldn't have been the same result that was in the ballot boxes. Yeah. Those ballot boxes were taken somewhere. My votes were taken out. And interestingly, at the count, one of the ballot boxes had got a lot more votes in it than the votes that were given out in the polling station. Can you explain to me how that could ever work? They'd taken my votes out and put too many of somebody else's in. Mm-hmm. And this is in the UK.
I know. The corruption is so sophisticated in every which way.
Well, you only have 21 days in the UK to object to an election. And I didn't. But election fraud there's no statute of limitations on that. And there's more than a dozen people would have had to be involved in that fraud. That's why that's why the count was late. That's why the ballot boxes didn't come in on time. The area had got smaller, not bigger, so they should have been in faster. But they weren't. They were in a lot longer, hours. Well, that's because they had to take them somewhere and sort them out. But there's no statute of limitations. The people who were involved in that election fraud will be looking over their shoulders for the rest of their life. And we only want one whistleblower to come forward, and it's all over for them. And that will happen, because that is what happened in northwest Leicestershire. Interestingly, having been the MP for 4 terms, 14 years before that, we sort of have a head of police in the area who's normally a police inspector. And obviously, over that time, I've had a lot of heads of police who I've worked with, and some of them had retired, some of them have been moved to other areas eventually. And one of them, I bumped into him months after the election, and he came over to me at a filling station when I was filling the car up with fuel, and he said, "How are you?" And I said, well, pretty upset about the election fraud and the way it was rigged. And he looked me in the eye, David, and he said, "What did you expect the establishment to do to you?" He was the former head of police in my area who I'd worked with for years. What did you expect the establishment to do to you, Andrew?
I'd like to
Wasn't
think
surprised.
the silver lining of this whole pandemic thing is it woke up a lot of people, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people like, wow, things are not as we thought they were. And to discard our beliefs and the narratives that we've been delivered, just like let it all go and wake up and not believe anybody or anything any longer. Do you feel the same in a way?
It's the pandemic, the overreach, the government overreach of the pandemic slapped me wide awake. And I was interesting that the same, but I mean, it must have always been like that because when I went round the lobby with all the vaccine harm evidence, the scientific papers, same journalists who wouldn't run the post office evidence 10 years before still wouldn't run, and run by the same editors of the same newspapers and the same TV stations. That's when I realized we just don't have a free press in the UK. Um, we don't have a parliament that can speak without fear or favour. I mean, one of my colleagues, who's probably one of my best friends, I actually had two AstraZeneca shots before I realised, and the second one hurt me a bit. And I went to see a friend of mine in the Conservative Party, and he'd headed up the net zero group. We had to call it the net zero group because we were against net zero, basically, against the man-made climate change rubbish. So he was fairly awake. And I went to see him and I said, look, there's something wrong with these vaccines. Don't take any boosters. And he'd already had two Pfizers. And I thought he'd listen to me. And a couple of weeks later, he came to me and he said, I'm not right. I said, what do you mean you're not right? He said, I've been and had a booster and I've not been right since the moment it went in my arm. I felt weird. And the next thing I know, he's in hospital. The next thing I know, he's dying. And then a colleague of mine went to his hospital, got him out because he was on the end of life pathway. And he's younger than me. And we got him into the hospital opposite Parliament called St Thomas's. And they had to cut both his arms and legs off and the end of his nose. And they kept him alive. He got sepsis. And they made him some prosthetic arms and legs. And the government put him in the House of Lords because he couldn't be an MP anymore. They gave him a peerage. Well, he admitted to me on the phone last year that he knew what had caused all that and it could only be the vaccines. But he won't speak out. And shockingly, in February this year, he rang me, my old friend. And the message went something like this. He rang me up and said, Andrew, you've got to stop fighting back against the system. So what do you mean? He said, you've got to stop or they're going to destroy you. I said, mate, they cut both your arms and legs off and you're telling me that I've got to stop fighting back. And he said, well, that's what they told me to tell you. They'd forced him to ring me. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Wow. If you could do everything all over again, would you make different decisions?
I don't think I would. I would have voted. I would have been more of a rebel than I was, and I was considered a rebel. Um, I think in life we regret the things we don't do more than the things we do. And at the end of the day, I know that my actions saved the lives of a lot of small children in the UK and the families from a lot of heartache from injuries. And very few human beings get a chance to do that and to be in that position. And I didn't sacrifice anything for nothing. And would I do it again? Every day of the week.
You know, we can't predict the pathways of our life. Anything can happen. So you were delivered a pandemic while you were in service to Parliament, and you didn't anticipate this, and you had to stand firm for what you believed in, and it caused you a tremendous amount of disruption in your life. And I think that's the moral of the story: is we make plans in life, but we just have to make the right decision as we go along. We have to
Well,
dig deep.
I could have taken the bribe. I could have shut up. They'd have had me completely compromised and could have made me do whatever they wanted. By David, I could have sold my soul to the devil like they did, and they have done. My colleagues have done. Um, but you're never able to buy it back. And I could not have looked to myself in the mirror for the rest of my life if I'd let those children be harmed and I could do anything about it. Um, so, and I'm very encouraged with what President Trump put out yesterday, his Truth Social, demanding that Big Pharma demonstrate the claims that they made to him. I think he's shifting his position um, to a position where when the evidence comes out of the vaccine harms and the deaths, he's going to be able to say to the American people that Big Pharma lied to him and they lied to everyone else. I honestly think that the truth about the vaccines is going to come out before the end of October. I think RFK Jr. and Jay Bhattacharya, who's your new head of NIH, instead of the awful Anthony Fauci. Jay's a really great guy. I know him. I mean, he's such a good guy. I don't think they're going to be dissuaded from exposing the truth. Will I be vindicated? Well, they wrote me out of the post office scandal because they didn't want to give me the credit for that. And they'll try and write me out of, but no one can take those speeches out of Hansard off the record of Parliament. And I think when this is all out, I think there's going to be a massive breakdown in trust from the public in healthcare, in science, in politics. And I think, I think we're going to need those people in positions of power who failed in their duty of care to the public. I think they are crimes against humanity. And unless harsh punishments are given out, I don't know how we'll ever build the trust back with the public. They've been let down so badly by every institution in the UK that was there to protect the public interest and protect their health. Um, and and also we need harsh punishments because we need a lesson that for anybody who wishes to take a position of responsibility where you have responsibility and power over other people, that if you abuse that trust, you will be punished. And that's going to have to come from America, I'm afraid. We're going to be relying on the new world to protect the old again, to come to our rescue. And I'm rather hoping that in October we have a tsunami of truth and justice that'll come across the Atlantic rather quickly and sweep away the self-serving politicians that we've got, not just in the UK, but across the whole of Europe. Um,
Well said.
Maybe it's a pipe dream, but I'm hoping for it. I'm praying for it.
I look forward to checking out your documentary on thalidomide and the Horizon scandal. And I hope that this justice doesn't take 20 years to come to fruition.
Well, I think they'll have got about 20 months, and that's probably as fast as we can go. I mean, I know that RFK, putting him into health and human services in the US and people thinking it was all going to happen overnight. I mean, it's like helicoptering in the new captain for an oil tanker that's going in the wrong direction. And when he's landed on the deck, he finds out that the crew are in mutiny and he's locked out of the wheelhouse. And it's taken some time for him to establish himself. And there'll be a lot of personality changes in CDC, HHS, NIH, which you're seeing now. But he's got his people in position, and the sooner he acts now, the safer his position. Because obviously, I'm aware that there are moves in the Senate and Congress. Big pharma puppets are trying to remove him from office, and that would be an awful thing to happen.
He's moving quickly under the circumstances, I believe. Well, Andrew Bridgen, thank you for your time. I hope one day we get to meet in person. Maybe you and your buddies and myself, we can sit down and have a pint or five, and we could talk about how we could improve the world together. So thank you for being such a warrior for all of us.
Well, we've got to win the war yet, and history will be written by the victors. We better make sure we win, then, haven't we?
Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your story. Greatly
Been a
appreciate it.
pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you.
All the best.
That was fun. Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Great story. Great storyteller. Thank you.